Hello, everyone. This is going to be 5.6 Nationalism Influences Politics. So, we're going to be talking about um, the big country and all the big ideas behind that big country. So, we're going to start with a quote from Henry Clay, a firm believer in nationalist politics, who said, "Government is a trust, and the officers of the government are trustees, and both the trust and the trustees are created for the benefit of the people." He is obviously a firm believer that big government is better. There were others who would disagree with him. We'll get to them in the next section with Jackson. So, our objectives, we're going to analyze the causes and effects of nationalism on domestic policy during the years after the War of 1812. We're going to describe the impact of nationalism on the nation's foreign policy and summarize the struggle over the issue of slavery as the nation continued to grow. So, first, we are going to look at nationalism and domestic, that is, hometown affairs here in America. After James Madison, we had James Monroe as our president. And his time in office is called the era of good feelings. Not necessarily because everybody agreed with each other at this time, but more because there was a lack of options to get angry at. Everybody was of the same party because the Federalist Party had died after the War of 1812. So Democratic Republicans were the only party in town, and so everybody was a Democratic Republican, basically. And there was a spirit of nationalism during this time where a loyalty and devotion to one's country, this sort of fierce pride in America that was taking over, and the idea that America was something new, something different, something special. So here's our fifth president, James Monroe, 1817 to 25, from Virginia, where he was a soldier. He was a continental congressman, a senator, ambassador to France and to England, governor of Virginia, secretary of state, secretary of war. Gosh, he did a lot. He had a full resume. And the way you know he is a soldier during the American Revolution is because Monroe is in the painting that they have of Washington crossing the Delaware. Monroe is the guy holding the flag. Also, his daughter Maria was the first one to have her wedding at the White House. She was the bride. Now, the Federalist Party was gone. However, there were still people around who believed in sort of the ideas of big government being better. One of them being Henry Clay of Kentucky, who created the American system. The American system was a series of ideas and concepts that the national government could sort of help make America bigger, better, more wealthy by doing big government stuff. It had several big ideas. The first one was a tariff on foreign goods, basically a tax on foreign goods in order to keep the American economy going and strong. He also wanted to build new roads and new canals to link the East Coast to the Midwest. Things like the Erie Canal, the National Road, and even more. So these two were already built. Clay wanted to make a bunch of canals and a bunch of roads. He also wanted to reestablish and re-up the national bank, basically. It had to be renewed every 20 years. So it was renewed in 1816. And so he wanted to make sure that the national bank was very strong. Now, the other guy who is still a very big nationalist and federalist is John Marshall, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. We talked about him with Judicial Review and Marbury v. Madison. Here he is. He is still establishing precedents that talk about the power of the Supreme Court and how they're going to use it. So, for instance, he used several cases that appear before the court in order to advocate for big government. So we have Marbury v. Madison, which we already talked about, which established the idea that the Supreme Court got to decide what is constitutional and what is not. So he had that going for him, which is nice. And that was both laws that came from the president or from Congress. He also passed McCulloch versus Maryland, or decided on McCulloch versus Maryland, which the basics of the case is that John Marshall said that the state of Maryland could not shut down or tax a branch of the national bank in their state. That basically a state government could not override a federal government choice. And so the bigger picture, like I said, is that the federal laws had precedence over state ones. That's been hotly debated ever since. We also had rulings that favored big business as well. Ogden v. Gibbons said that interstate commerce was controlled by Congress, meaning that you cannot change the price of shipping just because goods moved from one state to another. And so we see that large corporations and the national government as a whole is getting a lot of help from John Marshall as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Now, as the economy is getting bigger, we do see that this sort of interconnectedness of our economy leads to problems because if one thing fails, everything else is impacted too, now that they're all tied together. And sometimes when a lot of things fail, there is what's called a financial economic panic. And so now failure is tied to several companies. And the cycle of supply and demand meant that sometimes the market was good, sometimes the market did poorly. And so between 1815 and 1860, there were three large panics. And in each of these, people lost their jobs, lost their homes, the economy went bust for a little bit, and it created big problems. And so that's about all the economics I can take before I need to stop. So let's look at nationalism and the American Renaissance of this time. The idea that we're creating an American idea for ourselves. So this is a time when American artists and writers began to celebrate what it meant to be an American. And they started to create an American identity too. So we started to write books where American characters talked like Americans and they sort of used, American accents and acted like Americans. And we see other authors and playwrights doing the same thing. We also see American painters in the Hudson River School were also using their paintings to show off the beauty of America and to talk about how cool America is. So here is Thomas Cole and the Hudson River Valley School illustrating James Fenimore Cooper's Last of the Mohicans. And you can see the bigness of America and the smallness of the people. That is something you see in a lot of Thomas Cole's paintings, is America is big and beautiful and our natural wilderness is amazing. The people are dwarfed by it, basically. And also we see, here's a local Missouri one, the county election by George Caleb Bingham. It shows the power of the people in electing leaders. All the people, although you do see an African American who is not allowed to vote, is part of this crowd. So let's look at nationalism leading to American expansion. So as this sort of national devotion and love of America increased in our country, we also see a desire for America to grow, to expand. And one of the main proponents of this is John Quincy Adams, who is Monroe's Secretary of State, the guy in charge of foreign affairs. John Quincy Adams is also the son of President John Adams. Now, both Adams and Monroe promoted the idea of America expanding, getting bigger. John Quincy Adams once said, individual liberty is individual power, and as the power of a community is a mass compounded of individual powers, the nation which enjoys the most freedom must necessarily be in proportion to its numbers the most powerful nation. So basically he's saying, since America's big, we deserve to get bigger. Now, in 1818, we see that we start to expand. First of all, General Andrew Jackson invaded Florida to attack the Seminoles. The Seminole tribe had been providing safe refuge for runaway enslaved people. Now, he had not been given permission to do this, but he did it. And in 1819, John Quincy Adams tried to work with Spain to basically buy Florida from the Spanish, considering that it was already occupied by an American army. They might as well sell us Florida. And in 1821, the Adams-Anise Treaty gave America control of Florida. So here we see the Adams-Anise Treaty. It's in the crosshatched area down there in Florida. Now, the Spanish also gave up their claims to Oregon. Both England and America had been saying that Oregon was their territory. We ended up splitting it. We got Oregon and Washington. They got British Columbia, kind of the southwest part of Canada. And this nearly led to another war, but eventually we were diplomatic about the whole thing. And Britain and America decided to share the Oregon Territory for about 10 years and eventually revisit the issue. So here we see the Oregon Country and Columbia District. We see that eventually we split it at the 49th parallel. Everything below that became America. Everything above that became Canada. Now, John Quincy Adams also helped to formulate, this one is very important, so I would make sure you know this one. Adams helped to create what's called the Monroe Doctrine. This was James Monroe's foreign policy because we were very worried about European powers coming over and sort of messing with the Western Hemisphere, especially because there were a lot of rebellions going on. A lot of the colonies in Central and South America were disappearing and becoming independent countries, and we were worried that England or Spain or France or Russia or some European country might decide to come over and take over. In 1823, James Monroe spoke to Congress and said that America would not mess with European affairs as long as Europe stayed out of the Western Hemisphere, but if they did, we would be there to stop them. So it basically said that the Western Hemisphere is under the protection of the United States, and any European invasion would be met by us. Now, this was not a law. This was part of one of James Monroe's speeches, but it was a statement of commitment and a statement of purpose. This only had a minimal impact at that time. However, it's going to have big dividends later on as America continues to grow and expand and get involved with foreign nations. We often use the Monroe Doctrine to sort of justify our expansion. So here is a political cartoon of America saying no trespassing in the Western Hemisphere. Now, let's look at slavery and the Missouri Compromise, lastly. This idea of nationalism only went so far. The idea of America being one big giant country that agreed on everything. We are still very divided about slavery, especially North and South. And this became very clear with America trying to join the United States in 1819. We had enough people, we had a constitution for our state, so he said, please let us join. However, the problem was Missouri joining the U.S. government, the U.S., Missouri becoming a state, would mess with the balance, the balance between free states and slave states, of which we had an equal number at the time. And this balance was keeping things peaceful in the Senate at the time. And so I guess this Missouri is the show me your national division state at this time, at least. So if Missouri entered the United States as a slave state, or if Missouri entered as a free state, it would throw off the balance one way or another. And so this caused a lot of problems. It caused a lot of anger. It looked like this could bring us to a fight about slavery about 40 years before the Civil War. In the end, though, Henry Clay put together the Missouri Compromise in order to make sure that that balance between slave states and free states was kept. So it was a short-term solution, but it kept sort of moving the issue down the road of slavery. So Missouri Compromise had a few points. First of all, Missouri would be allowed to enter America as a slave state. However, we would add a second state to balance it out, and that would be the state of Maine. Maine would balance it by entering as a free state, so we'd keep that all-important balance. And the other thing was we drew a line across the bottom of Missouri where in the future anything south of that would enter as a slave state and anything north would enter as a free state. So you should probably know this map pretty well. I would say know the slave states, know the free states, know the three important parts of the Missouri Compromise. Now, this stopped the fighting, but like I said, the issue of slavery was not resolved. The South felt that they were being sort of hindered by the North. The North was worried about slavery moving west with our country. The South also blamed the Missouri Compromise for inspiring uprisings of enslaved people, because now they realized if I make it from Tennessee to Massachusetts, I'm a free guy. The South also insisted that the northern states, if they wanted to keep the peace about slavery, they would need to be quiet about it, basically. Congress actually put in a rule that said slavery would not be discussed on the Senate floor. This was known as the gag rule. Now, for instance, we do see that there were several slave uprisings, including one of Denmark Vesey, who was the leader of a slave revolt in South Carolina. Denmark Vesey once said, "We are free, but the white people here won't let us be so. And the only way is to rise up and fight the whites," and that is exactly what Denmark Vesey did.